Morning, everyone. That was a resounding response right there. One person gave me a reply. I'm gonna train you all. I'm gonna say good morning, everybody. I'm gonna have a unison as 15 people say good morning, Doctor, or 17 people. However many people are in this course. So obviously, I'm just teasing. I'm not going to require that, but yeah. So I apologize for the little bit of late start. So one of the things I should probably throw a caveat is whenever I do a lecture or a recording or discussion that I've done in a previous semester, I watch the recording from the previous year to kind of make sure that I'm hitting on all the important points of the discussion. So I was listening to last year's discussion this morning as I was preparing for class, and I was having all kinds of technology issues. I could not get the YouTube videos to hit or to sound record. Sure enough, I come in here and I'm just trying to figure out everything sound wise is working except for YouTube is working. And I said, not again. How are we repeating this? But it turns out just the master volume was turned all the way down. And so that's why when we started, or about right before we started class, I clicked on that video and it's big loud sound in the background. I was trying to get YouTube to work. So I do have some videos that I would like to share with related to the topic today. So it's not just us kind of going back and forth about IT standards and IT governance, but that's the goal. I do want to start out class talking a little bit about the research project. I know it's not technically due till the end of week 5, and we're not even done with the end of week 2. Trust me when I say it will come up much more quickly than you think. It would come up quickly if this was your only class, and this is not your only class. Okay, you've got a lot of other classes that are going to take up a lot of your time, and so I want you to start thinking about this now. Um, so keep in mind that this is meant to be kind of an exercise in data analysis. I do encourage you to use AI tools to assist this, but ultimately the work does need to be done by you. There were 3 forms of queries that I told you that you could actually do, or three query formats that I told you could do, and I want you to start thinking about this now. Simply because your approach is going to change depending on what type of format you're using. So first one I talked about was archival data. When I talk about archival data, you're going to go look at a data set that pre-exists, and you're probably going to derive a question from that. Now, this may be counterintuitive to the way that you would normally ask a research question. Many of you would say, I have a question that I want to answer. I want to find the data for that. And it's very difficult to do something like that, simply because if you're looking for existing data, it has to be formatted in a very precise way for you to be able to answer certain questions. It's not impossible, but in general, it's a challenge. So if you're wanting to work with archival data, I would recommend that you start by looking at the data itself, the data that's out there, like go to a data set like Kaggle or one of the other, a source. That's not a data set, it's actually a source of data sets, and see what data exists out there and then what kind of questions you can derive from those. So that would be the approach if you're going to use archival data. If you're going to use survey data, my biggest advice right now is to start thinking about what it is that you're going to, the question you're going to ask and how you're going to set that up in a question format, because you will need to start filling out the forms for that and start preparing for the survey. And then the third one was a little bit weird. It's just fairly new. It's AI generated query data. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context to how you would use AI tools to do research for data analytics. And the answer to that is I'm going to use the example that they use for the CPA exam. So a fairly well-known researcher in my field, his name's David Wood. He is an accounting professor at BYU. He spearheaded a research project a little bit over a year ago where he used ChatGPT to answer or to try to take the CPA exam. And he did this in several project steps. He did this for ChatGPT 3.5 and then later on for ChatGPT 4. And his early attempts at this were very not very promising. ChatGPT basically was doing no better than guessing for the early versions. Now, once they actually figured out how to use the AI tool effectively, they managed to get it to where it actually passed the CPA exam with very high scores. That would be kind of the project that you'd use an AI tool, is that you wanted to know if AI can actually perform in a certain capacity, and you're going to actually run the test yourself. You're going to have to create the tool to ask the data questions and then evaluate it versus human performance or evaluate it versus some other standard and performance. So that'd be an example of how you could actually use AI generated data for research. Again, I know that it seems like I'm focusing on this pretty heavily right now, but trust me when I say that this is not something you want to wait till like the day before the assignment is due and try to come up with a question. You're probably not going to come up with a question that you're personally interested in or that you want to do a lot of work on if you wait till the last second. So I want you to start thinking about that now. Think about how it is that you want to approach this particular problem. And again, there's multiple phases to this project. So this first phase is kind of all important one because that sets the stage for the rest of the phases to come. If you have questions on this, let me know. It is fairly open-ended as far as your approach for this. There's not a very specific format that you have to follow. That's by design, you're graduate students, so I'm assuming that you've done projects of this nature right now, so this is going to be a little bit more open format and open approach. So that's the goal. All right, today we're going to talk a little bit more about governance frameworks. At least that's what I'm calling it now. You notice it's called IT standards, but then it was the same frameworks that we talked about last week, and that's by design. If you were really tired of these frameworks, I've got bad news. We're going to talk about them again next week. So, but we're going to kind of relay that into a discussion about how they approach from a controls perspective, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But the whole goal of today is to actually make sure we understand the distinction between these three frameworks. Now, something I've alluded to already is that these three frameworks are kind of the big three as far as the CPA exam goes, but they do not exist in a vacuum anymore. These were kind of considered to be the end all be all if we go even back 5 years ago. We've seen a lot more frameworks become developed over time as we see the problems arise. I think that's going to continue to be a trend, is that these will not be the three that only exist, but these are three good general frameworks that I think we can talk about for IT governance perspective. There's going to be some specific ones with area of emphasis. I fully expect that we're going to start seeing a lot of AI frameworks pop up. We're not going to really talk about those, but we're going to talk about how they are generated and what they come from. Uh, Optimally, there are probably some other frameworks that we want to talk about. One that you're already familiar with, and then a few others that are going to be kind of thrown into the tail end because they're fairly new and deal with more specific areas. But these are going to be the big three for this course, the ones that you do need to know, not just for this course, but I do have a comps question that I also ask related to this. So you want to make sure that you have this down and take diligent notes in this area. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So I started out talking about the International Organization for Standardization, which I gave you the link to that. So ISO. Now, question comes: if they're the International Organization for Standardization, why are the initials not iOS and ISO? Well, the snarky answer is iOS is an operating system, so we're not going to use that. But the actual answer is that this is a European group, and group is a very literal sense, is that it actually is a large organization comprised of many smaller organizations. And I believe the actual name, I say this every year, I'm going to look it up and I never do, but the actual name is in French, and the way that the initials line up is actually ISO, but the way it's translated to English is International Organization for Standardization, because the English language is an absolute mess. And yeah, that's not going to be on the quiz, but that's a true fact of life. The English language is a mess. So starting out, how many national standard bodies do we have, and what is the name of the U.S. standards body? So we're going to kick things off. Mary, what did your group find for this particular question? Good. ANSI, American National Standards Institute, 173 bodies. This number fluctuates over time. Interestingly, I think when I first started teaching this, and these are not the exact same questions, not the exact same cases, but they're templated very similarly to the questions that I asked 5 years ago. It was around 155 years ago, and so that's increased by about a little over 20. Last year was 172, which means they've only had an addition of one in that period of time. So they're starting to get adoption by most of the countries worldwide. I want to say that's a large percentage of the countries worldwide. I think there's only like 186 recognized countries in the world. I'm not 100% on that figure. That's also not going to be on the quiz. But so 172 is pretty close to a full adoption of all countries. And so when we talk about the national or iOS or ISO, we want to make sure we understand what is their goal. What do they do? And the answer is they set standards. And so that makes sense for the International Organization of Standardization. But why do we need standards? And the answer is that if nobody else is going to set the standards, then we don't have any frame for conduct for how organizations should operate. In some contexts, that's fine. Okay. In some contexts, that's fine. We're going to use my old favorite to talk about when we start talking about analogies. We're going to talk about a restaurant. In a restaurant, you would not expect the recipes to be identical from restaurant to restaurant. That's what makes restaurants unique. But in other contexts, in business operations and in kind of accounting operations, finance operations, we want to make sure that those tasks that go from organization to organization are somewhat consistent. They do not need to be identical, but they need to follow certain rules and certain protocols. And this is why we have an organization that kind of sets up these standards. Now, this is not necessarily a location level standard. The International Organization for Standardization operates more at a entity level, so it's very, very big picture type scope. But you can actually drill down into the standards that are available on the website, and you can find standards that actually operate at the location level. So how do locations themselves operate on a piece by piece basis? So it is scalable to whatever operation you need. But for the most part, for our purposes, we're going to think of these as large entities that are trying to implement these standards. So what type of standards are we talking about? So I had you all look at the standards section of the ISO website. And I didn't want you to answer information technology because that's going to be our focus, but there's a whole bunch of other standards that are listed there. So what are the business processes that ISO covers? And I wrote down W after this. So Tyler, I got the right Tyler this time. Okay. What did your group say on this one?
Health and safety, energy management, food safety.
Good. So quality management, environmental management, health and safety, energy management, and food safety. So all of these are standards that I think we can I recognize are probably important for operations to take place in organizations. Some of these are very, very personal to me. Food safety standards. Okay, obviously because I talk so much about food. Want to make sure that when we go out to eat that we're not going to get immediately sick. That's happened to me before, and it's not a fun experience. Has that ever happened to anybody else? Gone out to eat and get sick? Because it's like it's when you're lying in your bed groaning from food poisoning. Said, "Where was ISO?" Okay, so like that's what you're going to say. Yeah, but now at a more general level, we do want to make sure that there are conditions that organizations have to meet, simply because if there are not standards by which they're judged, then many organizations would kind of try to second guess the standards or try to just ignore them altogether. So that's why we have this in place. Now, we're going to come back to ISO. I will say the drill down on ISO that we're going to talk about, I don't particularly like it. One of the things that I've thought about doing is trying to actually look at the standards themselves, because you'll notice that the drill down that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be going into the 27,000 family and looking at what is available. You actually have to buy the standards in order to be able to do a full drill down on the ISO 27,000 series, which I said, well, there's no way I'll be able to afford it. It's actually not that expensive. It's only a couple $100 when I was looking at it. So maybe that's a worthwhile purchase, and we could all have our own ISO 27,000 series. We could be an organization that operates according to that. But I do not think that's necessary. I think that we can get the necessary detail that we want just by looking at high level detail. So then we've got COBIT, all right? And the very first thing that I want to preface this with is the first question, okay? Oh, I love these websites, but I hate it when like the pop-ups occur. The pop-ups are just miserable. That is the danger of free content, ladies and gentlemen, is that I don't charge you anything for textbooks, but you have to deal with pop-ups, okay? Who would pay for a textbook just to get rid of pop-ups? Well, okay, I would, but nobody else, I guess. Okay. That's just a necessary inconvenience. Dr. Barnes, deal with it. And yeah. Apparently, I'm the only one. Come on. All right. Come on. All right. So let's get there. So this is a question about COVID, and this is actually pretty interesting. Like I said, a lot of these resources that I'm referring to, I've been using for like the past 5 years, but they do update these articles over time, which is one of the things I really like about the CIO articles, because if there's new information, like there are some changes in the scope of COVID in 2023, they actually updated the article to reflect those changes. So this is a good resource. If you find yourself in need of reference on COVID, you can refer back to this, even if it's after this course is done. But the very first question, and probably the most important question of the entire course, okay? What version of COVID is currently in use? McKenna, you have responsibility for this important task. Isn't that unfortunate? COVID-19. COVID 2019, okay? All right. Yeah. I'm gonna make this joke like 5 years from now, and everybody's gonna be like blank because I don't understand the joke, Dr. Barnes. It's just like, yeah, I have very definitely said COVID-19 when I was talking about COVID-19. Yeah, and transpose this. Yes. Very, very unfortunate time for COVID to actually introduce a new set of standards is 2019, because COVID-19 and COVID-19, yeah, very, very similar. All right. You see why this is such important. So we probably need to use the vernacular COVID 2019 if we're going to be talking about the standards, because COVID-19 is just too easy to get confused. But yeah, so that's what we're talking about here. And so as stated in the first paragraph beginning, one major difference, what is COVID designed to do? McKenna, you did such a nice job with that. I'm going to stick with you for this one. So this one's a little bit less important question, but still important nonetheless. What is COVID designed to do? Okay. Yeah, so guidelines for IT governance and management, okay? It says it focuses specifically on security, risk management, and information governance, okay? So yeah, as far as that goes, it says, so I want you to take the word focuses with a grain of salt, because I think that's a misnomer. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer in the situation. When we talk about COVID, as we're going to talk or see through the rest of this discussion, that focus is generally not something that I would attribute to a broad framework like COVID. But it's what it's trying to say in this sentence is that all of the aspects of IT governance that you would be concerned about, which it lists out security, risk management, and information governance, are areas that are addressed. Now, which of these do I think is the most prominent? I will say, logically speaking, this is probably going to be more of an information governance framework than security or risk management. Because as we established last week, risk management and security are subsets of information governance as a whole. And COBIT is an information governance kind of overarching framework that we're going to be talking about. So hold that in context. Let's go ahead and do the second part of the question, though. What is it not designed to do? So we're going to move on to Cole. Cole, what did your group say on this one?
We said not recognizing business processes or making IT related decisions.
Okay, so this is an interesting distinction. It says it focuses on security, risk management, and information governance. Okay, information governance. So how the organization operates, and then it comes back and says, okay, but we don't want you making any decisions based on our standard, which is kind of contradictory. Don't you think? Is anybody looking at this and saying, I don't get the distinction, Dr. Barnes? This is a little bit weird. So as we're going to see here, the nature of a broad framework like COBIT is it's trying to identify what the problems are, or what the areas of emphasis are. And those areas of emphasis are guidelined within the focuses. It says we're going to have areas of emphasis related to risk, security management, and information governance. But it doesn't really tell you how to solve those problems. So here are the issues, areas of emphasis that you need to be focused on, but how to actually address those particular issues is not particularly, we're not going to give you guidance on. So it sounds really, really familiar. So again, let's talk about something that may be contextual. So some of you, this is more recent than later. Some of you may have to stretch way back, like a year and a half or more. Who remembers materiality back from 417? Okay, so materiality. Remember I said that in materiality, PCAOB guidelines require that the auditor make an assessment of materiality. Does everybody remember that? That's actually true for all sets of guidelines, okay? But that's not relevant to this course. But they said you have to evaluate materiality. Then what did PCAOB said? That they basically gave you specific guidance on how to make that decision of materiality, right? No, they didn't. They did not provide any guidance whatsoever on how to establish materiality. It's a case-by-case basis. So they told you what you had to answer, but they didn't tell you how. Same concept is applicable here. COBIT is very good at saying, here's what you need to address, but it doesn't really tell you how to address that. Now, is that important? And the answer is yes, the importance distinction, because if we're talking about a broad focus, that means that we need some narrow focus frameworks to be able to address the how to actually address the problem. Fortunately, we've got two narrow focus frameworks that we're going to be talking about today. So let's go ahead and move on to one of those frameworks. We already talked about one, let's talk about the other. So now we have ITIL. What does ITIL stand for? Brett, what did your group say?
ITIL stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library.
Information Technology Infrastructure Library. Is everybody okay with me using ITIL from moving forward instead of saying ITIL? Has anybody got a big problem with me just reading out as ITIL? If you've got to let me know before I go, because I don't want to offend anybody by saying ITIL. Okay, good. I'm glad we got that out of the way. All right. So, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. What version is currently used, Brett?
Version ITIL for
Yeah, so the ITIL version 4, and it was also released in 2019, which I do not think was circumstance, or happenstance. I do believe that there was probably some sort of alignment between COBIT and ITIL, because as we're going to see, they tend to be used jointly together. So if one gets updated, then there's probably going to be an emphasis on the other one getting updated to match pace with the previous one. All right, so that was really good, but there's a focus, and Brett, since you're last on the list, I'm going to stick with you, and I've asked you 2 easy questions, so I think it's only fair that I ask you a difficult question. So according to the ITIL article, what is the primary focus of this version of the ITIL framework?
it maintains the original focus of ITIL, which is creating predictable IT environments and delivering good services by streamlining processes, but also has a focus on fostering agile and flexible IT departments.
Good, good. So let's go ahead and summarize that statement. Okay, let's go ahead and summarize that statement. How did we characterize ITIL last week? What were the 2 words that I used? IT, and then I used 2 words to kind of consolidate the terminology. Everything that Brett said was correct, but if we're going to consolidate this into a simple term to actually approach this, what would be a good one? Does everybody remember the term service management? IT service management? All right. So that's going to be how we characterize this, is that ITIL provides us a framework for managing services related to information technology. Okay. And there's different ways that we can approach that. A big part of that is going to be integrated IT department into the business and understanding how it operates. But that's an important one. Now, this article has changed a little bit. You notice this is actually a pretty up-to-date article. This is recent from June 3rd, 2025. This is going to be some detail that's very relevant to today's day and age, simply because this was updated just a little bit after a couple of months ago. So, a few months ago, I guess couple is 2, and it's actually 2.5, or closer to 3. Anyway, so yeah, IT service management is something that's very relevant. Now, how does this distinct from IT governance as a whole? If I were to say, are IT governance and IT service management related? Would that be a fair statement? Okay, how are they related? How are they related together? Well, when we talked about this last week, we talked about IT governance. We were talking about the different goals and focuses of IT governance. And I said, what is our primary objective of IT governance? Now, I know it's been a week, or actually it's only been 5 days. Okay, so you guys don't have an excuse. It's only been 5 days. All right. But we talked about this focus of IT governance. And what do we say the primary objective of an IT governance system is? It's to actually make sure the IT framework, or the IT resources, IT assets generate what? I think Jack said it, but I talked over him, so I apologize, Jack. Okay, that's not gonna be the last time I'll talk over you, by the way, because I'm fairly deaf. But yeah, value. A lot of people said that. Okay, a lot of people toss that in. So actually value. So we want to make sure that IT assets of the organization are providing value. All right. That, in a nutshell, is what ITIL is supposed to be focusing on. Now, it doesn't use the term value, objectively speaking, but if we're talking about service management, what is the goal? It's to make sure that the IT services that we provide are managed properly so that we can accomplish the objectives of the IT governance, or IT governance. And one of those primary objectives, the one that's going to be the primary emphasis and focus for ITIL, is going to be the generation of value. Now, is that sufficient? If I asked you what is the goal of ITIL, can you say value? I would probably say that's good, but that's probably not specific enough. And that's why we're going to actually use the term service management as kind of our way of approaching this particular question, or approaching this particular topic. All right, so yeah, ITIL 4, and it's got the objective of service management. That's a very, very broad objective that we can actually approach there. All right, so that was the individual questions. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of a drill down now. So I had you go ahead and go look at the ISO 27000 series. And I think I alluded to this already, but I'm going to repeat myself. We are going to see ISO 27000 numbers in a variety of contexts. Hopefully, we'll have time to actually look at the video that actually explains the difference between 27001 and 27002. For your purposes, you do not need to worry about the distinction. I'm not going to ever quiz you and say, what's the difference between 27001 and 27002? For the most part, if you just answer 27,000 series, that will be sufficient because they're all related to the same objective, and that's going to be the information security management system. All right. So one of the questions I had you drill down into, I said, approximately how many standards are in the ISO 27000 family, and what is the broad objective of these standards? So let's go ahead and answer the first question. Moving back to you, Mary, what is the how many standards are in this family? Good. So security of assets, financial information, intellectual property. Yeah. So there's a long list of stuff. So interestingly, it says more than a dozen. And this is kind of funny because I've asked this question many times and the answer always changes. Not more than a dozen. That's always consistent. But if you do kind of do a search and see how many standards are in the ISO series, ISO 27000 series, at times it's been close to 50. Last year they scaled back to 25. I think it's just however many they have active at any given point in time. So the answer is it depends. Like any good accounting question, okay? It really, what does it depend on? It depends on when you're taking this course. That's what it depends on. So yeah, weird context, but the overarching objectives have remained consistent. Okay. Now, what was one of the very first things that Mary pointed out in the definition? It says manage the security of assets. Now, when I talked about the ISO 27000 series, I said there was a goal, an objective of the ISO 27000 series to create an information security management system, ISMS. All right. So that's going to be kind of their catchphrase when we talk about the ISO 27000 series, is creating that information security management system. Now, just based on the name alone, what do we think the primary objective of an information security management system is? Give you a hint, I might have said it out loud. Security, okay? Now, is this consistent with the notion of governance? Is security one of the objectives of information technology governance? Yes, it is. Is that our primary objective for governance? No, remember our primary objective was value, but then we also said we have to generate value while constraining our managing for what concept? What did I say? It was something optimized value. 5 days ago, guys, come on. Risk, there we go. Risk optimized value, okay? How do we characterize risk and security within the organization? So we want to make sure that we're generating value in the organization, but we're not sacrificing the security of the organization's assets, or that we're not exposing the organization to undue risk. Now, could you actually make a distinction between risk and security? They do list them out separately, so you could probably make some sort of small distinction. For the most part, that's splitting hairs. Our purposes, we can say risk and security are related concepts, okay? That when we incorporate security in an organization, that we're managing for risk in the organization. So we have two smaller standard objectives. We got ITIL, and then we've got ISO 27000. We've already established that ITIL is going to be on that value axis. This one is going to be on the security axis, that risk axis. So we're addressing our particular problems in order of sequence, and basically saying that ITIL is going to be kind of that primary objective. This is the secondary objective, but doesn't mean that it's not important. We do have to consider value with respect to risk. Now, this is going to answer some questions a little bit later on, but let's go ahead and continue on with ISO 27000 series. So then I had you do some drill down, and you can kind of see here, this is nice reading right here. If you enjoy reading financial statements, you'll get a kick out of reading this information right here. So I answer some questions about the ISO 27000 2018, which is the standard that's listed here. So the ISO 27000 series is characterized as the ISMS family standards, which the ISMS stand for. Spoiler alert, I've already answered that question, okay? Information Security Management System. Again, that's going to be the emphasis that we talk about with respect to this standard. Since it's only preview, we're only able to view content of 3 sections. What information does section 3 entail? What is section 3? Easiest question ever, Tyler. Don't say I never did anything nice for you. Terms and definitions, okay? So This is not just a throwaway question, but I do want to talk a little bit about why do these terms and definitions exist? Well, the first one is simply because this is a very, very broad set of standards. If we don't have explicit terms and definitions that are listed here, then it may be not clear as to what these represent. Now, some of these terms are fairly straightforward. These are terminology that relates to an information security management system. Some of these are a little bit more subtle. Like if we think about the word attack or audit, do we think that we could define those pretty easily? I would assume everybody in this room could define these pretty easily if they had to, simply because they've been exposed to these concepts before. So why actually have we have these vernacular and these definitions in the standard? And the answer is that whenever we're talking about a set of standards similar to this one, the terms are contextual. The terms are contextual, meaning they mean a specific thing within the context of the standard. So even though audit probably has not changed in terminology, they're talking specifically about the audit evidence that's going to be related to the information technology governance tools or the assets in play. All right. So it is important to be able to define those terms and definitions. And for standards like this, we will see all these standards contain the same things. The good news is this is the only one that we're going to do a full drill down on. I'm not going to ask you to say, all right, I want you to find where the terms and definitions are for all of our sets of standards. Okay. That would be genuinely a waste of time. Okay. Doing it one time is contextual. Doing it many times is just me trying to take up your busy space. And let's just say you've already got plenty of work to do, so I'm not going to try to do that to you. All right, review the terms in section 3. In your opinion, do these terms adequately cover terminology relating to ISMS? So this is just an opinion question, Tyler. What's your group think here?
I think it covers it pretty well.
Okay.
A lot of equal definitions, and it cross-references it to other standards and definitions.
Good. So there you identified that there's cross-referencing going on, so that actually kind of provides additional context to the terms that are a little bit subjective. So good identification. So yeah, any dissenting opinions? Anybody look at these terms and just basically say, yeah, this is nonsense. This doesn't mean anything to me. You probably looked at the terms and definitions and said, this is a lot. This is a lot to take in. What danger do we run by having so much information there? Information overload, maybe. Okay, people will just kind of assume that the information is sufficient and not even bother to check it. But if we didn't provide sufficient detail, then if there's a critical term that needed to be identified or a critical concept that needed to be defined, then we would not have that listed. So there's a little bit of a delicate balance that doesn't exist there. I guess that I'd say that it's better to opt for too much rather than too little, which I would say that that's probably a good policy to have in place. All right, so before we move on to ISMS, or sorry, move on to COBIT, I do want to talk a little bit about what it is, the difference between ISO and 27001 and 27002. And we're just going to watch this brief video that kind of explains the distinction.
The relationship between ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. They're often used interchangeably, which can lead to confusion about their intended uses. In this video, I'll provide a high-level overview of the differences and relationships between these two standards. Hi, I'm Danny Menimbo. I'm a principal here at Shellman. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I've been with the firm since 2013. I co-direct our ISO certification services practice and also oversee our Mountain and West Coast attestation services. ISO 27001 is a management system standard which provides the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving what's referred to as an information security management system, or an ISMS. Now, what's an ISMS, you might ask? It's a collection of people, processes, and technologies with the purpose of managing information security risk within an organization. This is the standard that you get certified against. So where does that leave 27002? Well, the intent of this standard is to be used as a reference for determining and implementing the controls to address and mitigate risks identified during your ISMS risk assessment process. They are contained within Annex A of ISO 27001 and will often comprise what's referred to as your Statement of Applicability, or SOA, which is a tool utilized during your risk treatment or risk mitigation process based on their applicability to your unique environment and scope and the results of your risk assessment process. Now.
All right, so everybody got that? I'm expect to see a lot of shaking heads like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, Doctor. So from a subtle perspective, all this is basically saying is that 27,001 is the standard itself. 27,002 is a reference for controls implemented in response to the standard. Now, again, is that an important distinction? If you're operating in this area, probably so. Is it an important distinction for the classroom? Are we going to be implementing the 27,000 standards, series 20,000 standards? I hope not, okay? Not unless something crazy happens that I'm not anticipating. Again, the only distinction you need to understand is the 27,000 series, they all have the same overarching objective as the implementation of the information security management system. So basically that showing that entire video to you was a waste of your time. So yeah, you can put that in my evaluations. I said I wasn't going to talk about evaluations again. My bad. All right. So let's go ahead, move on. All right. So we're going to be talking about COBIT now. So the current version of COBIT was updated to include focus areas. What are some examples of these focus areas? And also to incorporate and move focus areas needed. Why is this an important characteristic? Okay. So McKenna, you're apparently our COBIT reference, our COBIT guru here. So do you feel good in that responsibility role? Sure. Okay, great. All right, that's good. So what are the focus areas of COBIT? Good. All right. So then they basically say, look, we want to make this an adaptive framework. And by the way, this is something that's unique to COBIT 2019, simply because if you go back to previous versions, they were not adaptive. They could not actually change these focus areas. They was not able to look at different areas. They said, these are the static areas and this is the focus on, which is why we needed a framework that said we need to be able to be adaptive if possible. Do you think this adaptation, the ability to incorporate or remove focus areas, do you think that's an important feature of COBIT? What'd your group say? Yeah, that's probably the best summarization. And it's so simple that things are always changing. Okay. It's an overarching theme we've talked about a lot before. You know, risks change, environment change. We need tools that can actually change with it. It doesn't make sense to draft a new version of COBIT every time something in environment changes, but to be able to adapt to the current version would be very, very helpful. Now, from a big picture scale, this is very obvious. Okay, this is very obvious. Let's just think about some of the things that McKenna mentioned. Cybersecurity. Has cybersecurity been as big an issue as it is nowadays and in the past? Like if I were to go back 10 years ago, was cybersecurity on the forefront of people's minds? Probably not. It was still an issue. There were still data breaches that occurred, but it was not nearly as widespread or prevalent as it is now. Also, if I go back 20 years ago, did cloud computing even exist, or at least in context to its current form? There were some very small versions of it, but people were not calling it the cloud, okay? When you said cloud, people would walk outside and look up in the sky, okay? That's what people thought about the cloud. So there's some very, very big picture issues that we can identify that are very prominent. I think the size of enterprise is something that's going to be very relevant and something that needs to be very adaptive, simply because we do no longer have kind of the one size fits all sets all standards for an organization, because organizations can actually scale in size. You can have organizations with massive impact that have very little personnel, very, very heavily technology based and technology emphasis. So having standards that can adapt to different environments and different situations, that's what we need. Now, again, we know COBIT is a very broad objective basis. So it's going to be very, very challenging to find specific criteria that we can apply to every single situation. But the broad objective, I think, is going to be sufficient for what we need it for when we talk about planning and trying to set our strategic objectives. All right, current version of ITIL contains 7 guiding principles. Which of these principles do you think are most consistent with the primary focus of ITIL that you identified in question 4? All right, Cole, what did your group identify in this answer or this question?
So we said either focus on value or with collaborate and promote visibility.
Yeah. So I think the focus on value is the one that I identified that I thought was the most important one. This one's also a little bit confusing because it says ITIL 4 contains 7 guiding principles, and you see the number 4 and the number 7. Is it 4 guiding principles or 7 guiding principles? But no, it's 7 guiding principles, and focus on value is listed first. And I think that's a reasonable and rational approach, because again, one of the primary focuses of that service management system is to utilize service assets for generation of value in an organization. Now, there's some things here that are a little bit more subtle. So the second question I ask, are they consistent with the organization's or article state objective of integrating IT into the overall business structure and encouraging collaboration between other IT departments? Okay. What do you guys think? Is that something that's consistent with the, or do you think these 7 guiding principles are consistent with that? Stick with you, Cole.
We said yes. The principles are consistent because, they allow collaboration between IT and overall business structure, to help the overall business process by making it more efficient while maintaining the value, of customers and clients.
Yeah. And so I think something like focus on value and collaborate and promote visibility, those are very, very obviously big picture objectives. They integrate all parts of the organization and say, make sure that we can consider how this actually affects the organization as a whole. Then we have that term, think and work holistically. Does anybody know what the word holistic means? So I've heard it in holistic medicine. That's a weird hippie medicine, Dr. Barnes. It's like, what does holistic mean? You got to think so. Go ahead. All encompassing, yes. So we want to make sure that we understand when we do something, when we integrate something within an the IT system, how does that affect the organization as a whole? All right. It's really weird because I say as a whole, I'm thinking WHOLE, but holistic is kind of thinking as a whole. Okay. How we actually approach the organization as a whole. And if we can have resonant effects, if we do something that's going to help one part of the organization but harm the rest of the organization, that's probably something we should second guess. So ITIL is going to be a very specific set of standards focused on this idea of value, but it's important to temper that value with other considerations as well, which goes back to that concern about that risk optimized value. We do need to think about what risks we're being exposed to when you actually implement these assets. The ultimate objective is to actually increase the organizational value, to actually generate a return, but we do need to be very, very cautious in how we approach that. Okay. And so there's some good standards here. I think this last one, optimize and automate, this is going to be one that's going to be very prevalent in coming years, something that's we're going to see a lot more focus on simply because of the advent of technology taking the role and taking more of a progressive role in organizations. Obviously, I'm speaking about like AI tools and the like, so that we're going to see something take a bigger role in many governance situations. All right. Next question was IT literature, and in a few instances, this course used the term IT governance framework and IT control framework interchangeably describe ITIL. Based on what we've learned about ITIL, which of these terms do you think is the most important? Why or why not? Brett, I'm seeming to give you these subjective questions that you have to answer. Do you feel up to this one? Okay, what you got?
Said an IT governance framework is a bit higher level and broad, ensuring your IT decisions are aligned with your goals as an organization. IT control framework is more about the day-to-day controls you're putting in place and how effectively they're implemented. IT literature is a large, expansive library of best procedures, so it's probably more closely related to IT governance.
Yeah.
It's more broad and overarching about organizational goals.
So this is going to be a little bit of and I'm trying to think of the word. This is going to be inconsistent with the way that we're going to be approaching this moving forward, because what Brett said is completely accurate, is that governance and controls are not synonymous. All right. Governance is a much broader focus or much broader and encompasses the organization as a whole, whereas controls tend to be very focused on security. That being said, is it possible to have governance without controls? I mean, everything is possible within this context. You could say, okay, well, I could probably have governance in an organization and focus on value without having to worry about security. It has to be a really small organization. But in general, for most organizations, is it possible to have governance without controls? Probably not, okay? That's probably not a logical approach to take. So for our purposes, we're going to be using these terms synonymously, governance and controls. In fact, how synonymously? Next week, we're going to be talking about IT controls, and guess what frameworks we're going to be talking about? The exact same ones, okay? The exact same ones. So that kind of leads to the idea that even though governance is a much broader and more encompassing term, that there are going to be components of it that we have to think about from a controls perspective, okay? We do have to consider these terms interchangeably, simply because if we don't, we fail to do it. Now, is it possible to have controls without governance, I guess is the other question. We've already established you can't have governance without controls. Can you have controls without governance? The answer is probably yes. That being said, the whole goal of controls is to actually contribute to the larger scope of governance. So that probably would be a pointless activity to do something like that. All right, last question. According to the COBIT article, COBIT best suits clients that use multiple frameworks. Is this consistent with everything we've learned about IT governance and control frameworks so far? So I'm back at the start of the list, and I don't want to pick on Mary again, so I'm just going to ask this in general. What do you guys think? Is it consistent with the idea that, well, of everything we've learned, that it's better to use multiple frameworks instead of just one framework? Yes, they all have different objectives and they all have different focuses and different scopes. Okay. We're actually going to define those next week. And remember, I have always used the term broad when I describe COBIT. COBIT by itself is probably not going to be sufficient for a solution because it says, here are the issues, but doesn't provide any guidance to solve them. What does provide guidance to solve them? ITIL, ISO 27000. All right. They focus on, one focuses on service, value in the organization, the other one focuses on security in the organization. So when we identify the problems, we need to have a tool, a way to actually address those particular issues. All right. So that kind of answers the next questions. Why is using COBIT in isolation likely to be effective? Could the same be using that ITIL in isolation? Let's go ahead and take just a quick look at this last video, and I'm not going to watch the whole thing. It's 6 minutes 16 long, but we've got like 2 minutes, so we're going to watch 2 minutes of the video, and then we're going to call it good. By the way, these are older versions of COBIT and ITIL that they're being referenced in the video.
We're going to look at the relationship between COBIT 5 and ITIL. I'll begin by emphasizing that the two frameworks complement one another. It's not a case of choosing one or the other, you need both. The two do have some common concerns, some shared interests. For example, both frameworks describe a number of processes that should be established by a well-run enterprise. In some cases, a COBIT process maps directly onto an ITIL process. For example, the COBIT process BAI06 Manage Changes maps onto the ITIL Change Management process. In other cases, there is no simple mapping, but there is a common concern. For example, the management of risk across the service lifecycle has a high profile in ITIL, but it does not describe a formal process. COBIT, on the other hand, describes process APO12 Manage Risks. Broadly, COBIT is concerned with what IT should be doing, whereas ITIL is more concerned with how it does things.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. Although I do want to point out, these people seem to be really happy with their job right here. Okay, they seem to be really happy doing controls work. So this is maybe something we should be more excited about. And if I'm not providing the proper enthusiasm, do tell me what I need to do to make everybody smile like this when we talk about governance stuff. All right, we've got first Excel assignment and quiz on Friday. I will see you all then. Have a good day.